this next presentation, and it's just by way of context, the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Jeff Scott was CEO at the time, and we were approached by the Referendum Council, and we were asked, would the New South Wales Aboriginal Land Council facilitate 2 workshops, one in Sydney and one in Dubbo. And it was put to Council, and Council said, absolutely yes, because in the past, this network, our land councils, have been left out of the discussion. So we said, whether you're treaty, whether you're sovereignty, or whether you're any other type of movement, we want to facilitate them discussions. So we had some heated discussion. We actually had protests in Mount Druitt. They burnt the floor, the new tiles of the Rudial RSL, and the bouncer said, "Oh, please, can you go over in the car park? These are brand new tiles." And in Dubbo, it was heated. And the analogy that we used was that if I was to split this room up into 3 areas, on that far left-hand side, you'd have treaty people. On the right-hand side, you'd have sovereignty people. And in the middle, you'd have people that weren't unsure yet. And so we had to hear 2 sides of the room so the people in the middle can make up where they wanted to go in relation to how they see a future under some type of arrangement, whether it be treaty, sovereignty, or what we got now is called the Uluru Statement from the Heart. So on that, I'd like to now call on our panel. Please give them a welcome to the stage. Councillor Charles Lynch. Jeffrey Scott, CEO of Dark and Young. The co-chair of the Congress, Rod Little. And our long-lost brother from Queensland, Terry O'Shane. He said he loves this land rights network. He come down and he said, I help fight for that land rights, my old brother. And if you don't know Terry, he's Clarkie's sparring partner, Jeff Clark. But we won't go there. It's not about that. It's about the Uluru Statement from the Heart. So delegates, I'll now hand it over to your panel. Thank you.
The hardest gig in Australia at this point.
1, 2.
I tried to get a little bit of advice from Roy about making this opening address around constitutional reform, Makarrata or treaty. And he said, brother, I hate to tell you this, but you're going to have no luck because you're an accountant. So the one thing for sure, you can't tell jokes. Yeah. And he said to me, look around the room, and if you feel like a duck in a shooting gallery, you know you're ready to go. So, again, earlier I know I acknowledged country, but I'd like to do it again as we gather on the lands of the Wonnarua people. And as David said, when you acknowledge country, there's got to be meaning in it. And, you know, I greatly would like to pay my respects again to our elders, both past and present. And for me personally, the statement for me is about our youth, those young leaders that I see out there in the audience. And from my region, I know I've got several here today, and they inspire me every day to get up and get out of bed and try and make a difference. And that's very important. So I'd just like to acknowledge them young fellas again. I also look around the room, and forgive me, I'm getting older. Greg come off the stage and he said, brother, I was looking at that video there in the region. He said, you know, you've aged. I was really concerned because when I sat down, I realised that was only 2.5 years ago. So, and knowing I'm a first-term councillor on year 3, I'm thinking, I know what's causing that. So anyway, I'd also like to acknowledge the rest of the panel. We have, I'm the soft tone, so I'm going to set a scene. Jeff's the hitter. Terry's the shaker. And Rod's got all the Q&A. All right. Last year was a big year in the 40th anniversary of our proud land rights movement, and 50 years since the 1967 referendum. I wasn't born in 67. I actually, in around the referendum time, when, as we know, a record majority of 90% of voters across Australia voted in favour. I will note, I did come along about a month later, so I've probably given away my age. But an important thing for me was my mother at the time was 23 years old. 6 years before that, her and her 4 brothers were living on a common, sweeping a dirt floor, sleeping in a tent, and hauling a 44-gallon drum 4 kilometres each way to bring fresh water to wash and bath with. And, you know, she has fond memories of that, and she remembers greatly her brothers complaining about it. Over the last 2.5 years, I've spent quite a bit of time with my mother, who's very ill. And I remember talking to her once, because I got involved having a look at the referendum council and recognition and what was going on in this space, and I said to her, "Mum, can I ask you a question about the referendum in 67? She said, "You can." I said, what changed for you?" And she sat there and she said to me, she said, "The one thing I remember, I used to go to the picture theatre with your uncles, and the 5 of us sat behind chicken wire." And she said, and I remember after that, probably not straight away, she said, but about 12 months later, there was no more chicken wire. So that's what the referendum meant to her at the time. We might have come a long way since then, but clearly we still have a long way to go. In 1967, nothing was given to us on a plate. Our warriors, our campaigners and our supporters had been fighting for our rights from the very beginning. The 67 campaign in itself was 10 years in the making, and ironically, a long time later, it's basically happened in the same time frame again. Our campaigners and supporters earned and fought for our rights in Australia. So, no longer would we sit behind chicken wire as a basic example in our own land. And we won a great deal that day, not least of which is the fundamental recognition that we are here, as we always have been, that we have rights, that we have survived, and we have never ceded our sovereignty. That day is now written into history. Like all the ones that followed, we moved our rights forward. Many of those pages are written by our own very own land rights movement. But while we have come so far and survived so much, we are after more. Today we are wanting to move beyond survival to take our rightful place in Australia, not just from behind the chicken wire, but owning the theatres, making the movies, owning our rightful piece of the economy and regaining fully our autonomy, self-agency and self-determination, which came through on those early PowerPoints this morning from our regions. On the 50th anniversary of the 67 referendum in May last year, I was fortunate enough and honoured to attend the National Convention held in the heart of this land at Uluru in Central Australia. Obviously, it was not an ideal process. I know that, and we acknowledge it. But what process ever is, and there is always a need for consultation and more dialogue, which is the key to anything in moving forward. But for me and the New South Wales Lands Council, it has been a powerful next step in a much longer process for real change, if there is to be any. At this point, we were primarily interested in ensuring we could make an informed decision and help others in our network and my region to make a similar informed decision on anything arising, or I wanted to get a better picture of what was being proposed and where we were heading. I'd largely watched from the sidelines and really only got involved in the later stages, because it all started in 2007. So ironically, another 10 years of grinding. I had a watchful eye and I had a hopeful ear, as anyone in our communities has on such things, but I had no direct experience of its process. And if I'm honest, I had probably harboured a sense of well-cultivated cynicism around here we go again. Like everyone in this room, we know our people. We know our communities. I know a lot about our needs, our hopes and our aspirations. One thing for sure, as many in the room would know, stepping into a leadership position can be a steep learning curve. To situate all that knowledge and experience into processes like this can be overwhelming at times, but our drive to deliver outcomes for our people and see us and our kids flourishing in two worlds we find ourselves in has given us the strength to tackle tough decisions and tough discussions. And Roy made a point earlier this morning around leadership is lonely. If there is one thing that I've realised in the last 3 years, he's exactly right. It's a very lonely place. And some of the discussions of the dialogues and the convention that led to the Uluru Statement were tough and confronting, but importantly they were ultimately, overwhelmingly, very hopeful too. Throughout the dialogues, and more so in Central Australia and the Torres Strait Islands, government had been promising to listen and act for so long, but generally failed. To do so, deciding instead to write policy from the top down, to at times to the detriment of our people. I stood on the lands of the communities of the intervention, the Enugu people, who graciously allowed us to meet on their lands. I looked into the eyes of countrymen and listened to their words, the impact and the effects. They weren't resentful in any way, just hurt that they were all tarnished with one brush as neglecting their children. They asked that we stand together as one. We have a say in not just raising the issue we face every day, but also be part of the solution. It was clearly a minority inside a minority. They needed us. They asked us to stand together as one. Again, we have a say in not just raising the issue we face every day, but also to be part of the solution. It was, again, clear a minority within a minority. They need us, we need them. Frankly, we need the support of the majority of Australians. Strictly speaking, a majority of votes from a majority of states and territories to make a meaningful change, if any, was to happen to a constitution. I've got an accountant joke in here, but we'll skip that one. What else I know is that if we stay divided as minorities within a minority, we will struggle to achieve the structural reforms we need to move forward. Whatever we agree, those structural reforms need to be. This is not a stifled debate, quite the opposite. Our people and communities have a right to have different views. And I stand here today, one of many, to stand up for our rights, all of our rights. What I'm saying is that from where I stand and where the New South Wales Aboriginal Lands Council stands, the Uluru Statement from the Heart is a powerful and very strategic document. It is a message of hope and of our people's strength. It carries the strength of the Enugu countrymen, it carries the strength of everyone of us in this room. At its heart, a simple, unifying and powerful goal, a rightful place for our people. In our own country. Power over our own destiny so our children will flourish, so they will proudly walk and succeed in two worlds. At its heart is a simple, unifying and powerful goal, a rightful place for our people in our country, power over our own destiny so our children will flourish, so they will proudly walk and succeed in two worlds. The simple message, wrapped in generosity and tradition of our culture, is the power of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. We need to harness that support and mobilise that unity. We need to build momentum to be meaningful and structural change, truth-telling, agreement-making, and a voice to government and parliament and dare I say it, a referendum to change the Constitution, to provide certainty and security to these reforms. We need that voice not just to Parliament and not just to the Commonwealth Parliament. We need a voice to all levels of government and executive government too, right across this country. That is why New South Wales Aboriginal Lands Council has been working closely with the re-establishment of the Coalition of Aboriginal Peak Organisations to bring the Uluru Statement alive in this state. And while we know it's going to be a long journey, we already are seeing the power of the statement in guiding our unified efforts. We need a bipartisan arrangement, as this will need to take time, and it shouldn't be held at the wind of a change of government. We need truth-telling in this country before anyone can confidently move forward to any sort of meaningful agreement making. Call it a makarrata or a treaty. At a fundamental level, it is one and the same, a coming together after a struggle. And telling the truth about the past, about the chicken wire, and much more and much worse, is a vital step to that coming together. So we can continue to heal and most of all share our culture and heritage proudly amongst all Australians. The statement for me is not about compensation. It's about equality, inherent rights, coexistence, and power to control our future. For me, it gives an opportunity for responsibility of the past to be taken whilst we take control of our future. It's about ensuring the voice from our communities, raising the issues, and giving the answers to government is not diluted or tainted in its journey. That it's not affected by policy intervention and what government may feel is best for us, as history shows and shows and shows it doesn't work. It's about being informed and being included, being in control of our own destiny. Again, let us raise the questions, and at the same time we'll give you the answers. There is still much to be done, much to be discussed, including here today, and much to be gained. I'm not a constitutional lawyer or expert on constitutional reform, and there are many here today more wiser. But our people's best defence to date has been the word no. No, that's not what we want. No, I don't like that. No, that's not going to happen. If we continue this mode of defence, we cannot expect things to change. Nothing will change. We must drive change, own change, control change, and just maybe it's time for us all to say yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thanks, Councillor Lynch. I want to acknowledge the people on this land we're meeting on today, the Wonnarua people, and also the Minderibba Land Council, for allowing us to meet here. I'm Jeff Scott. I'm the CEO of the Darkins Young Local Land Council, but in a previous life I had the privilege to be the Executive Officer of the Constitutional Reform Council. And so what I thought I'd do here is run through this process to give you an idea of where we are today, so if you've got questions about it, what happened, why we come to some decisions, where it went to. All right, that's the statement up on the screen. Again, it was was framed that way. It sort of took a while to write it, but it was a real pitch, the 97% plus the 3%. And the issue about this is we can't do it alone. I think out there are a lot of good people in the country and they need something to actually rally around, and this statement was supposed to try and achieve that. But I'll start going through the process. On the Referendum Council, we had a few objectives on this. And the first one was to go out and talk to Aboriginal people around the country for two things. Get a proposal that was likely to be supported by Aboriginal people, Indigenous people around the country, and something that was likely to succeed in Parliament. There's always a difficult task, because the views of our mob around the country were, every forum, there weren't just two, there were 20 in the room. I think we tried to get 100 people in each forum. I think we got about 110 views. But anyway. We started off by having three sets of meetings, leaders meetings around the country to sort out how we're going to do this, who we're going to invite, what was the basis for it, how we get traction. We had a limited amount of time and a limited amount of money. In fact, there was, I think Prime Minister Abbott said we had an endless budget. Then we got Prime Minister, what's the last one's name? Turnbull, yeah, Turncoat. He cut the budget. That's what we came to. We had these forums, and then we had 13 regional dialogues, and the two that Chairman RC spoke about in Dubbo and Rudy Hill were two in New South Wales. Then we also had the National Convention in Uluru itself to tie it off. We tried to invite, we had a bit of a strategy around how we get enough people on. So we invited at least 100 people, sometimes there were more. But we tried to do it by having traditional people involved, and in New South Wales it was from land councils and some native title holders and others to get a balance, because that's where we thought the cultural authority was coming from. But also not leaving the organisations out, nor individuals. Then we had local conveners, local co-hosts. We spread it over 2 days. Left 10 elected meets to go to Uluru. It's a very structured program. A deliberately structured agenda, so we actually got through it in each agenda, and the same information was presented. So everybody got the same information and the same opportunity. That's where we went to. So we went right around the country. There's a few people in the room went on that journey with us, with their hands up. So it was but we went around to 13 locations around the country holding these dialogues. Canberra being the last one. And from those, we collated all the information from those dialogues and brought them together, and we went and met at Uluru. And that's where the convention was held at 2017 now. But the National Convention was to consider the outcomes from all the 13 dialogues, to seek some sort of consensus or agreement on the proposals going forward and what we take back to the Prime Minister. Identify the next issues and the headline ones, but actually map out how we take this forward. They were the 5 or 6, well, when we first started out, we only had 5 proposals, but a voice came out in so many of the forums, we added the 6th one. I mean, we're lucky in New South Wales. We have the New South Wales land rights system. It does give us a voice. The other states are quite envious of what we have. And a lot of the forums actually come out and said that. We don't have a land rights system. That's a summary of where we went to in the proposals themselves. What each of the forums supported. Just a quick snapshot of what came out of it. So most forums, or only one forum, supported the statement of acknowledgement. Now, something in the Constitution was said, oh, no, you were here once. That was at Ross River. Most of the other forums either didn't come to a position or they rejected it. Red is rejecting, green is yes, and the yellow is had no view either way. And where it's white, they didn't address it. So you can see on these ones, the statement of acknowledgement didn't get much support at all. The head of power didn't get much support. Because the whole debate was around, what do you do with the head of power? And most of the issue, I think, was trying to get people across the line on the Constitution, how it worked. I'm one of those sort of nerds who likes reading constitutions. I understand it, but the head of power, that was the 67 referendum. Prior to 67, only the states had the power to make laws for Aboriginal people. And the only amendment we had there was after 67, the Commonwealth could make laws. That's when we saw change start to happen. But in those debates, any way you amended the head of power, you couldn't stop the government from using it negatively against us. To do a hindmarch, do an intervention, to do income management. They can do those because they're called special measures. It's for our own good. On the prohibition of race discrimination, a lot of debate was on that point there, but a prohibition on race discrimination embedded in the Constitution would only, well, at the moment, everyone's bound by the Racial Discrimination Act, except the Commonwealth Parliament. The act of putting it in the Constitution would bind the Commonwealth Parliament. That's the only change it would make. And so many politicians screamed the house down about this one, but they never like to be told they can't do something. And it's a bit of a worry when they're told that, you want to take away their right to discriminate, but they want to hang on to it. The last one, which everyone agreed on, was the voice to Parliament. How that voice was structured, how you put it together was not decided on. We had many, many views. But the voice has been denied since '96 at the national level, was taken away. There's been various mechanisms put in place by advice to government and over the time. But again, people just want a voice back around the country. And the last one was agreement making. They wanted some final binding and lasting treaty or agreements around the country. So you can see the two on the end had the most support. So what came out of it? Well, the dialogues, they always identified a lack of voice, exclusion and powerlessness as a primary issue. And that was felt more so the further you got away from the city, the more remote you got. The impact of many governments with imposed solutions over the last 2 decades is a constant theme. If you went to areas where they had the intervention, it was very much, they feel it today. It's still going on. It's the next national apology they should make. The next one was everyone agreed on what had to happen. They're getting a voice back, having a degree of sovereignty, it was that, but the strategy and the objective and how we went about it differed. In the room, when we just mentioned we had treaty people, we had sovereignty people, people that wanted some other process, some people that wanted sovereignty from a government they didn't recognise. I don't know how you do that, but that's what all the discussion was about. But they're all worried about how sovereignty, language, culture and Aboriginal nations was going to work into this. Do you recognise nations in here? How do you recognise representation? Those sort of issues discussed, but every one of those forums is fairly passionate and heartfelt. And some of them, a lot of them are very, what's the word, colourful language is used quite a lot. And a few times it got a bit muscular. We had a few, Rudy Hill trying to burn the foyer was one. But again, people were very passionate about it and they went to the forums because they wanted to they didn't have a voice. It was the only forum that was coming around where their voice could be there, so they took the opportunity. It's only to be expected. Okay, so what came out of it? I'll find where I am now. So it prioritised the ways forward, the voice, agreements and treaties resolve the matters to provide more certainty going forward. But people were still concerned about the impact on sovereignty. They were concerned about, it came as a general consensus to retain a Commonwealth head of power, but changing how that power was structured wasn't going to change anything. There's something, you could say you use it for the advancement of Aboriginal people, but then they frame the intervention as advancement. They framed income management as advancement. So you couldn't stop it by changing the constitution. And they came to an agreement that the prohibition on race discrimination could be manipulated. Because the government they defended Hindmarsh, they defended WIC 2. All those cases as being positive and special measures. So it didn't change anything. But the Uluru statement was more about renewal, unity and strength, and what people yearned for was a voice, and something that would last. Not to have the various attempts at voices over the years, the NAC, the NACC, then had ATSIC, and each time when the government didn't agree with them, they abolished it. So I was trying to find a way to actually have it not so easy to be abolished when governments change their mind and there's a whim. Okay, I'll just finally go to the point about referendums. They're not easy, they're not quick. They require unity and they require discipline. We haven't got there yet. And it's going to take a bit of time. If you remember the 67 one, I think Terry will speak about those and other speakers, so I won't go there. But that's the Australian Constitution. It's a very, very dry document. It wasn't supposed to be a declaration of independence or anything. It was just set the laws where 6 colonies came together as one and decided how they were elected, how they were paid, what the structures were, and decided what powers went to the Commonwealth level, what remained at the state level, and what concurrent. Basically, that was it. It's not very exciting, but it actually governs the way it lives every day. Like land management, it's a state responsibility. That's why when Mabo came in, they fought so hard about it. It was impinging on their turf. That was it. What happened there? Okay. I didn't take those off, sorry. Then there's the 5 hurdles we worked through. I don't know if you can see those, but I'll just work through them now. That's what we've got to work out at the moment. The first one is our own mob getting across the line. We didn't think that was a big hurdle. Most people agreed we needed change. But what that change was, how it panned out, it was different in different areas, was one issue. The PM was the next hurdle we thought was there. The party room was the next one because we didn't know what was going on in there. It's not public. They make the decisions in private. Then there was the Parliament itself, and we thought once it got on the floor of Parliament, it wouldn't be too hard. And then we thought a referendum with Australian people are basically decent human beings. They yet let themselves manipulated by the propaganda issues, the Australian newspaper for one. No one should read it. But on these issues, on this one, we didn't get past the PM. So we've got to step back, rally and have another go at this again and work out our own strategies and where we're going to. Some facts. There's been 155 proposals for a referendum. The Parliament's only deemed we could vote on for 44 of them. So 140 of them died before they even got to us. But then when the people got to it, I've got 30 seconds. Right. There were only 8. There's only been ever 8 successful referendums. The last one was in 1977. We're talking 50 years ago now, or 40 years ago, sorry. That's how many unsuccessful ones there's been. You can see what the subject matter is. Some attempts at doing some real change, but haven't got through. The only ones that have got through are these 8. They're pretty dry. No Senate elections. They could pay state debts. After the war, the Commonwealth could do social services. The 67 referendum on the Aboriginal vote was the biggest one and the most meaningful social change. And the last one in 77 was really changed the world. And the territory could vote in referendums, the Senate casual vacancies, how they were determined, and judges had to retire. There's been a couple of attempts since, if we go back to the one previously. The last one was in 99. Been a few attempts. And that's the one was the Republic and the Preamble. That's the story, that's where it's at the moment. This is the two principles you've got to get across. You must get a majority of the states and a majority of the people. So 4 of the 6 states must vote for a referendum, and when you put everyone together, you must get more than 50%. Doesn't sound hard, but it has been proven to be hard in the past. And that's where it is. So the final points was one of hope and a focus on the future. How do we appeal to 97%? It's a call for unity, for a better life, to be honest and fair and truthful, and ask everyone else to come on the journey. And that was it. So thank you.
Just before I call Rod to come up and speak, I just want to note, I just got a note handed to me saying that there's a couple of live questions on our event poll. If people have got the app, if they wouldn't mind logging on, and there's a couple of questions there. One is just, have you read the statement? And do you support the statement? So we'd be appreciative if people could make the effort to log on and do that. Our next presenter. That might be all right. Can we have a show of hands who's actually read the Uluru statement in the room? I've just got to take my short glasses off. I know. All righty, now we'll get to the real good stuff. Next speaker, I'd just like to welcome Rod Little to the stage. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris, Jeff, and others. Charles? Thanks, bro. First of all, can I acknowledge on country and pay my respects to the spirits of the ancestors of this country and everyone in the room, the spirits of your ancestors. I want to pay my respects to you all and acknowledging the hard work, as Roy has pointed out today and on many occasions, of the people that have gone before us is why we exist today and why we fight. The process that Jeff had outlined, the National Congress of Australia's First Peoples, of which I and Jackie Huggins as co-chair, we attended almost all of those functions, all of those around the country, including Rudy Hill, where I helped put out the fire. But It was very interesting to see, as Jeff pointed out, that many of the people who attended these forums were hungry for information so that they could make up their own minds about what next, and to be more and more informed about things that are going to impact on their lives. So the National Congress of Australia's First People was invited to all of those of the leadership forums, plus the other forums around the countryside. Myself and Jackie, as traditional owners in the Perth area and in the Brisbane area, had an opportunity to speak at those two forums. But we listened very carefully, and we heard what people were saying around the country, and particularly as Roy described earlier about there are those peoples on that side of the room about treaty, that side about sovereignty, and those in the middle that wanted more and more information. And I think it's very hard for people who don't walk around or carry one of these around, that's the Australian Constitution, in your bag every day. And for those who are in politics, David, trying to read this, and even as a constitutional lawyer trying to read this, which I'm not, is so very hard and it's so outdated. So how do you take what's in this and put it into today's context, and put it into a context that's going to predict a future for you or shape a future for you and your communities is extremely hard. And to take that information from those who attended the forums and then go back into community to explain that is a very difficult job to do. So the Congress did, at the time when Jeff was CEO there, we surveyed our members, and our members strongly supported, over 60% supported a statement of acknowledgement in the Constitution. Although what we've seen had come out from Jeff's evidence there is that the recognition is really not the priority. So we acknowledge that. Congress members also strongly supported a treaty as a priority before recognition. And I know that in some states and territories at the moment, there is recognition in state constitutions of First Peoples. So it's already happening. Many are just waiting for the federal government to take the next step. Many of our supporters, but there were a lot undecided about the Commonwealth Government having the powers to make laws for our peoples. And I get that because from the experience from after 67, it wasn't the chicken wire that I experienced. I was old enough to be dragged along to the polling booth at 9 years old. And I never wore shoes to school, but I wore them to the polling booth on this day with my parents to vote. And they thought it was no more running away from welfare. The kids weren't going to be taken away from them. But 6 months later, myself and some siblings were dragged off by the police and placed in a mission. So there was still chicken wire in the mission too, bro, I'll tell you there. But those are the kinds of things that your parents have all believed in, that things were going to change. But it never happened. There was certainly one of the strong positions of the Congress members from our survey was that Congress should not support any changes to the Constitution, but it was, most of us thought, yes, there should be changes to the Constitution. What that might mean is something very different than what is presented at the moment. So those are the key things. The other one was, there was 8 questions, and I'll just sort of highlight some of the other ones. And one was over 80% of our members surveyed said that we should support a guarantee against racial discrimination in the Constitution. And that's that law there, that section in the Constitution that says that they can make any laws for us. And if I think about it, pre-67, there was a desire by our people to have somebody to stand up for us, and we went to the federal government for that, and that's where that change happened. But we've got to go back there again for a change. And that power has not really been to our benefit, those changes on those examples that Jeff used. The other thing, we had the consultations, which was supported. There was strong, over 60% of support for the inclusion of an advisory body in the Constitution. And the other was support for the referendum to be held. And these are all very consistent to what you've heard. The one thing that, why I'm standing here today is because Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people spoke post-ATSIC about having a voice, and Congress exists because people got together and decided they wanted to have a voice. Our role might be different to what is decided in the Constitution, but we still exist. And we aspire to be something like NSWALC, that has the power, that over 40 years built up their capacity to represent your membership the best way that you can. You have the capacity to support one another, and that's what we seek. That's what we desire. When we set up, and Jeff, you were part of the steering committee that established Congress, it is something there. We're a voice there to advocate for and protect the rights of First Peoples. We're here to be a conduit for the voice of our membership and our friends to whoever needs to listen and to hear what we have to say on behalf of our peoples. So with that, we heard during those consultations was that a proposition or a timeline or a roadmap, if you like, about how things would go. And Jeffrey outlined a little bit about what would happen. There was a perception this might take 20 years. And if I reflect on the lead up to the 67 referendum, that was a very long time of a campaign. And then I recall just reading some of the Hansards before 67 and sort of gleaned that there was a change of attitude over many years about what 67 would mean for other Australians. So it does take a long while. So I saw at one of these presentations from 2017 to 2027, the establishment of a First Nations Assembly that has the empowerment, establishment of a cultural fund, treaty settlement commission, which is what's being talked about now through the statement from the heart, land and property, and an economic base. These very things at the moment is what I'm going through personally as a native title claimant in Western Australia, negotiating with the state government. So therein lies like a long-term sort of proposition. But along the way, I think it's more important that we inform one another more and more. The one thing that the previous Prime Minister had said in rejecting the Uluru, the recommendations from the Statement of the Heart was that he knew how it was to lose a referendum. But I always pride our First Peoples on how we know how to win one. We won the 67 referendum. So that was a benefit for us. So many of you may have also been along to the Joint Select Committee public hearings. Congress has been invited several times to that. And our key features of that is that we have supported a voice in the Constitution. Whilst we are a voice already to our members and so on, but we still support what our members want. And we support the process to establish that governing structure. We also support the Truth and Reconciliation or Truth-Telling Commission and Treaty Commission. We support those things. We are of the view that the biggest challenge will be the body in the Constitution, because that requires a referendum and constitutional change. We also say that a referendum costs something around about 130 odd million plus, and there will need to be, I guess, a resourcing of a no vote as well. So there's a stack of money there. The commissions that are asked for do not, in our view, require referendum. They can be changed by the will of government or the support of bipartisan or all parties of parliament. And we think that that can be properly resourced by a forward-thinking parliament with the support of states and territories across the country. But the biggest challenge is the referendum, and I think that we have a track record, as First Peoples have a track record of, and know how to do this properly, how to inform ourselves, how to gain the support of others to back us on this, because it is our future, it is the future of this nation to rebuild itself to a nation that we can all enjoy, but where people recognise that we as human beings have rights as well. So on that note, I'll leave it there, because I think Congress is here. We will be around. We'll be around for 40 years to come too, and we will be partners with NSWALC, with many other organisations around the country and around the world, that will be here to support all of you guys, your futures, your families, and we'll do a lot of things together that our brothers Ed and Ari would know from Canada that we will do together, that we share. We have this network internationally as we do here nationally. So there are many questions there, but my message, my takeaway message is think about this in two ways. One is what can be achieved, because what can be achieved without a referendum? And we think at Congress that it is the commissions that can be established. It needs the budget and so on. The changes to the referendum is a big task, and it needs to have some time, a lot of education, and a lot of support for one another. And to finally say that this requires us all working together. Black fellows, white fellows, you name it, all of us working together. So thank you for listening.
I definitely got the right crew on stage with me. I'm happy with that. Righto. Without any further ado, it does give me great pleasure to welcome Terry. And now we'll have the thunder.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. Just keep an eye on that time there so I can stop. So I'd like to thank everybody, thank the Land Council for inviting me along. I recognise the elders, past and present, in the spirit of our mob. Recognise our international visitors. Recognise Philip Hawley was here this morning, who's an old campaigner who we marched on the streets in the centre of Sydney back in the 70s, early 70s. And I've seen him in a bit of trouble against a few people one night, and he sorted it out quite well. We also demonstrated in front of the old Parliament House and the World Council of Indigenous Peoples back in the day. And I travelled to the United Nations, of course, with Paulie Coe and company. And so we've had a long and checkered history, people like ourselves, and that was the nature of the beast. So before I go on, I just really need to recognise Roy. And Roy, have you got my notes? Have you got my paper? So they didn't even present a paper for me. So look, I'll have to wing it here. Nah, gammon. There's a, thank you, my brother. So I'm not going to wander too much about pay, but only keep an eye on that time there, you know, Old Father Time. They call me Old Father Time in North Queensland. So I'm a North Queenslander. I'm a Googie Yallinji man. I'm a Yallinji man, as I say, but people who know anything about Aboriginal history will know that the Yallinji people are the biggest nation in the whole of Australia. And I know some people here might challenge that, and that's part of my makeup. I like to be a bit controversial. Wiradjuri people reckon they're the biggest and so forth and so on. But anyway, got to kick them on, Look, I'm not here to talk for the referendum or against the referendum. I'm here just to talk to you fellas about how you make up your mind and about what's going on. And the next Minister of Aboriginal Affairs in the New South Wales government said to you that it's about how you approach the subject matter. Now, I think that's a great idea. Because back in 1897, when the people were putting together the Constitution of this country, they wrote to the Crown of England and said, do we include First Nation peoples in the Constitution, or do we include them as your subjects? And of course the Crown said, no, they're not my subjects, and as a consequence, we were never included in the Constitution. In 1967, following in the referendum, the lead up to the referendum, of course, the referendum was predicated on the fact that a lot of the stuff I shouldn't have to tell you fellas know it all. I mean, you got the Fergusons and the Pattons and all them fellas, and from 1944 and 34, and the fight that you had, and you had the Freedom March in this country and this state, and you've all been, if you not using, maybe a bit younger, but the older people, they know what has been going on. You were part of a struggle that's been going on, and you know better than I, and you can tell the generations after us. There's not one government in this country has legislated on our behalf. Not one. They've legislated against us. They've never legislated for us. And you think people like Turnbull and Shorten and them are going to legislate for us? You are dreaming. You're in the dream time. You know the bloke was saying, I don't believe in dream time? Well, if you think that's going to happen, you are in the dream time, let me tell you. It's a nonsense. And the 67 referendum, how that was predicated was on the 1957 in the ILO in Geneva, International Labour Organisation, put together Convention 107, was about tribal and indigenous peoples. And that was the only international standard for our mob, because the United Nations wouldn't put it together. And in fact, when we went to the United Nations through the 70s and 80s and the 90s, we're trying to get the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The US of A and their lackeys opposed the wording in the Declaration, let me tell you. So instead of taking 3 years or 5 years, it took 20 bloody years. Because even at that level, they opposed it. And understand this, that in 1992, we were seeking from the United Nations the right to have International Year of Indigenous Peoples in 1992. They opposed it. Now, why would you think they would oppose it? Nobody here could actually ever come up with the answer. You can't come up with the answer. And I asked a lawyer, a UN lawyer, I said, why would they oppose it? Because in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And when Columbus left wherever he left, Genoa or Go or wherever it was, the port in Spain, it was recognised as the dawning of colonisation. And they were not going to have a situation where the United Nations were going to support the Year of Indigenous Peoples and have opposition, and when, at the same time recognise the 500th year of Christopher Columbus and have Indigenous peoples around the world oppose those celebrations. So even at the United Nations, they were very much aware and very much opposed what had happened back 500 years ago. Because this country was settled under the doctrine of terra nullius, an absolute lie and a nonsense. And it was a law that was cobbled together for one purpose only, so that people could go out and could colonise other countries where native peoples or indigenous peoples were living. And right at that stage, right at that point, the act that went in place was based on a very racist background, very racist foundation. that we were a lesser being than those people come in those ships to come and colonise this country. And absolute nonsense. And I hear Nigel Scullion getting up and talking about you all the day, and the President Minister talking to you all the day, and we all sit there, Judy, and clap. Oh, thank you, Nigel, and thank you, Madam Minister. You clap away your heritage. You clap away your identification, who you are. Because it is about us. We have never been included in that Constitution. And in 1967, when they had a chance, all they changed was to give you the right to be counted in the census. And de facto, you then had the right to vote or be recognised as a citizen. Still never gave it to us. In 1992, when Mabo and the High Court won, when the High Court came down in our favour, and native title was recognised, from that day to this, tell me what government has synchronised their laws to actually accommodate native title. I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it. And 40 years on, as they're talking this morning about this land council being formed, and remember this, as a young man I marched the streets here in Sydney for land rights in this state, because we stand together as brothers and sisters and family. Nothing changed. And when our mate becomes the minister next year, sit in on his office and say to him, we come here with a very clear word for you. We're going to talk about social compacts or social contracts. Because every department in your government, we want to sit down with you. NSWALC has a portfolio. We will sit down with you. And every year before the budgets happen, we want to go through the budgets of the previous year and identify in those budgets where your money has been spent and how that has enhanced the life of our people. How has it stopped our incarceration rates? How has it increased our literacy and numeracy rates? How has it looked after our old people? How has it stopped domestic violence? How has it protected our women? And how has it protected our elders? And then we'll know that you are fair dinkum about addressing the issues in this country, about our people. Nigel's sitting here talking about private enterprise, the great destruction. He didn't talk about our incarceration rates this morning. He didn't talk about our infant mortality rates here this morning. He talked about all of the glitz and glamour, all the shiny stuff that you can see, all the smoke and all the mirrors. He didn't talk about the pain and the hurt. I want to tell a story here, but I'll be crying. I won't be able to talk about it. The very thing that happened to me today, and I met my little mate. Come here, mate. Come out here. Come out here. Come out here. I wouldn't know this young woman from Jerusalem. Come here. This is my family. Father went away when he was a young man. She told me today, we aren't. And she said, I went to Woodgill. Woodgill. I laughed and I said, like I didn't tell you some telling lies to you. Started talking. Your family, my family. I'm 72. How old are you, love?
32.
I meet her for the first time in my life. You reckon they're going to legislate on our behalf? Have they legislated to protect us from this sort of behaviour? Where for the first time in your life, as an old grandfather, 72, you meet one of your family members? I'm so happy to meet her. So I'm telling you this now. As the good minister next year said, our destiny is in our hands. Don't be afraid of it. Be safe and secure. Grab it with both hands and let's run with it. Thank you very much. Thank you, brother.